Good evening and welcome to this event hosted by Roseberys Fine Art and the Ben Urey Gallery and Museum. I am William Summerfield and I'm the head of Modern British and 20th Century Art here at Roseberys. Joining me tonight for this discussion are Sarah MacDougall, the director of Ben Urey Gallery and Museum. Sarah was appointed director in 2020, having worked with the gallery for 20 years, starting as curator in 2002. She has curated exhibitions on Joseph Herman, David Bomberg, Yankel Adler and Eva Frankfurter, amongst many others, as well as writing the biography of Mark Gertler, an artist central to Agi Katz collection, an example of whose work you can see on the screen now. Also with us is David Glaser, the chair of trustees for Ben Urey Gallery, a position he has held since 2000, re-establishing the museum after hiatus in activities since 1996. In 2018, he led the transformation of Ben Urey into a virtual museum and research centre, focusing on recording the Jewish and immigrant contribution to British art since 1900. Welcome both, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, William. Pleasure to be here.
I'm just going to start with a bit of an introduction to Agi's life. We're very pleased to be holding this event tonight to celebrate the life and career of Agi Katz, who you can see here standing in front of a wonderful painting by her close friend, Joseph Herman. As you can also hopefully see, I'm standing in front of a picture by David Bomberg, which will also be in the sale. So the works from Agi's collection went on display yesterday here at Roseberys in West Norwood, and will continue to be on display until this Thursday, the 26th of May, when the works will be sold as part of our Modern and Contemporary British sale, starting at 11 AM. Agi Katz was a celebrated art dealer, gallerist, and curator, and her long and distinguished career will be the subject of our discussion tonight. Agi was a long-standing friend and colleague of ours at Roseberys, and those of you who follow our auctions will remember the extraordinary result for David Bomberg's Bomb Store, 1942, from Agi's collection, which was sold last October. Very sadly, Agi passed away last year, but we are honoured and privileged to be working with her family on this sale, which encompasses works from across Europe and covers the breadth of 20th century art. This includes masterpieces by Sir Jacob Epstein, Mark Gertler, Honorat Gottlieb, and Joseph Herman. Agi was born Agi Rojko in 1937 into a Jewish family in Budapest in Hungary. We can see here a beautiful depiction of Budapest by Hungarian artist Gyles Zanko that was in Agi's collection until she died, demonstrating the importance of Budapest to her and her birthplace throughout her life. Initially training as a doctor, following in her father's footsteps, in 1956, following the Russian occupation of Hungary in the Soviet era, she fled the country, utilizing the public uprisings and demonstrations as an opportunity to cross the border, walking all the way to Austria, before traveling on to Britain. This experience was to remain with her for the rest of her life, providing a catalyst for her work. She worked initially as an economic assistant with chemical companies in the 1960s, and also met her future husband, Peter Katz, whom she would marry in 1962 and have 3 children with. However, Agi found her true calling when she began to study art in the 1970s, first at Camden and then at Chelsea School of Art, following her passion and deep understanding of art and history. This would lead her to become curator at Ben Urey Gallery in 1979, where her many successes included exhibitions in London and internationally, focusing on Jewish and émigré artists such as Epstein, Centenary Exhibition 1980, Mark Gertler, the early and late years 1982, and David Bomberg in the Holy Land, 1984. Agi would go on to open her own very successful boundary gallery in St John's Wood in 1986, which would run for nearly 30 years. At the gallery, she would achieve the mission she had learnt and developed at Ben Urey, bringing to the fore Jewish and émigré artists working in Britain from the early 20th century to the present day. She focused mainly on figurative artists and those that had been neglected by history, such as Alfred Woolmark, Honorat Gottlieb, and Morris Kesselman. She would also nurture wonderful friendships and working relationships with living artists, such as Lillian Holt, the artist and wife of David Bomberg, who you see as the subject of the painting behind me, Albert Luden, Gisha Koenig, and of course, Joseph Herman, one of the most important émigré artists of the post-war era, and a major part of the estate sale, with nearly 30 works for sale from all periods of his life and career. As you can see from this brief outline, Agi's was a life of drive and determination, and particularly a determination to celebrate and promote the underdog, regardless of market fashions, and one that is particularly relevant and inspiring in the world today. So I'd like to open the discussion now to the two of you, and I'll stop talking for a bit. My first question for you is, can you give a brief introduction to the Ben-Uri Gallery, mainly for the Roseberys guests among us? And in particular, could you discuss a bit about the activities of the gallery in the late 70s and 1980s when Agi was working there?
Okay, so Ben-Uri Gallery was formed in London's East End, in Whitechapel, in London in 1915 by a Russian Jewish immigrant artist, Lazar Bersin, who was a very charismatic figure. He left about a year later, and a collection began to be formed from 1918 onwards, principally of works by Jewish artists whom he had wanted to offer a platform for and to bring together their work. And I should say he named Ben-Uri after Bezalel Ben-Uri, the figure who created the tabernacle. After he left, as I say, the collection began to be formed by the then committee in charge, principally at that time someone called Moishe Ovid, who collected both older works of art and dealt directly with younger artists like David Bomberg. The collection was then enriched by the next generation of Hitler émigrés in the 1930s. And since 2002, we've widened our remit. So we now include works by artists from all nationalities, ethnicities, and religions, or none, who have a relevance to the story of the Jewish and immigrant contribution to British visual art since 1900. So all the work that we do in collections, exhibitions, and the research centre now comes under that focus. And since 2018, as you mentioned, David has been driving forward the digital transformation of the institution as well. So all our activities are now available online, but we maintain a physical presence here as well at Boundary Road.
Shall I brief you a little bit about your second part of your question in terms of Agi's period at Ben-Uri?
Yes.
It's a very, very interesting snapshot of history, because when she was appointed in the late 70s, there was also a social revolution going on in terms of immigrant communities and their acceptance in the UK into mainstream society. And it's true to say that the glass ceiling that all immigrant communities faced, some of course still face it today, unfortunately, but for the Jewish community itself, started to lift around that same time. And therefore, it's an interesting coincidence of history that Agi would come in and have the support of the colleagues at the time to actually put on really serious academic studies of important Jewish artists who were being actually re-recognized at this period of time as being not only having a place within Jewish artistic heritage, but actually the artistic heritage of post-war Britain. So therefore, these exhibitions that you referred to were actually in many ways groundbreaking, because they reintroduced Epstein, they reintroduced Gertler, they reintroduced Bomberg with a different light. I mean, it's very interesting to see. And I'm sitting beside the expert in Mark Gertler, so I'm going to be careful what I say. But it was the early and late years. It was really thought through, the exhibitions that she did at that period, so that it wasn't just a question of let's do an exhibition about Mark Gertler. Yes, it was an exhibition of particular periods that hadn't actually been highlighted before, and I think that's a real landmark in terms of her curatorial contribution, not just to Ben-Uri, but actually to post-war modern British art.
Absolutely, I would agree with that, and I would say also that she often was championing these artists when as you were indicating, their former reputations were at a fairly low ebb. And for example, the Bomberg show she did was a few years before Richard Cork's Stella monograph. So she was really, Bomberg had this career which was full of ups and downs, lots of downs really during his lifetime, and he didn't get the recognition he deserved for a long time. And she did two very important exhibitions on Bomberg, including one with the wider family and with Lillian, who you mentioned, and is in the fine portrait, of course. And with Gertler too, as David said, in focusing on those two periods, she looked at two periods which were very different in his work. So the early period was the period when he was at the Slade School of Art, and just after was really focusing on Jewish subject matter in quite a naturalistic way. The last period of his life, the last decade, was completely different work. He was much more in tune with what was happening in Europe. He was using very bright colors. Often paintings were in a high key. They were very tightly organized spatially. So it was completely different work. And she kind of put those two periods together. So that was quite brave. And also she always brought in rather eminent art historians of the time. So, for example, there she had Richard Schon and Francis Spalding. And in all of these exhibitions, she did similarly, so that she had scholarship, she did catalogues, which gave a record of the exhibitions, and not just, a brief record of what was shown, but a really new and fresh scholarly approach to looking at the place of the artists, where they fell in the greater scheme of things, and always also trying to bring to each exhibition, I think, some new works which had not been shown before. So it was a real vital contribution. It was very much adding to the scholarship and heft of Ben-Huri, in a museum capacity, although we were not yet a formal museum at that time, but she brought that knowledge, that passion, that scholarship, and that professionalism.
So it wasn't a physical space at the time?
Well, yes, it was.
They were.
So it was in Dean Street. At that stage, it was on the fourth floor of a synagogue, the old synagogue in Dean Street, which we were there until 1995. 1996, when the synagogue was closed and sold because there was no Jewish community in Soho at that stage. So yes, she actually had a space. May not have been the best space in the world, but any space is better than no space. And she exploited that space. So yeah. And
it was a happy coincidence that when she opened the Boundary Gallery, that we were then here in Boundary Road as well. So we coexisted,
well, it should be the other way around. Yes. we followed Agi into Boundary Road rather.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not because of the connection necessarily, but it was a delightful juxtaposition of a gallery that had this expertise in Jewish and émigré artists, and a museum that saw its focus much widening into that. So it was a delightful coincidence.
Did those exhibitions, did they travel, or were they mainly in London, or did they go to other places? Do you know?
The exhibitions that Agi did?
Yes, when she was up.
I think they were mainly here, but there are always many things to take into account with traveling exhibitions, and often just not everything falls into place in terms of timetables with other galleries and so forth. So I think they were mainly here, or as we say here, being then Dean Street. But they had this legacy because she put so much work into producing the catalogue and making sure that was sort of work of art in its own right, with essays and fully illustrated and so forth.
Yes, because some of the artists, I mean, she made a Mininski catalogue in about 2010. That must have been the first, catalogue on an artist like Mininski for many years.
Actually, we.
But did you?
Actually, not. We actually in the new guise of Benny after we brought it back to life in 2001. We did an exhibition with Liverpool University on Mininski in 2002, I think, with a very nice catalogue too, which followed on from, of course, the retrospective at the Oxford Museum of Modern Art. But you're right in saying, in referring to Mininski, because Agi was, if you like, the commercial champion of Mininski. We greatly respect Mininski from within a museum context, but if you wanted to buy a Mininski, your first stop would be Boundary Gallery, because she had stock, because she believed in the artist, which I think is also very important to actually try and share with your viewers, is that Agi bought work to sell that she believed in, and she believed in the artist, rather than any particular momentarily fashionable artist that flashed into an auction sale, did very well, and thinking, well, let's buy some XYZ. That wasn't Agi. So Agi knew Mininski, I've got no doubt, bought his work, or sorry, knew his widow, I should say,
yes,
bought his work because she understood that period, and she understood what he was actually trying to communicate, and respected it, and wanted to. First of all, every collector and every dealer, I'm sure, really wants to feel the painting. That's what you're buying it for. So Mininski, without Agi's, Mininski would not be as well known and as highly regarded as he is today.
And I think people really loved that they could see, particularly when we were both running together, they might come in and see a museum show, say, of Epstein, and then they could pop along to Agi's and actually buy a drawing or something. And that was, amazing for people. It gave people a sort of dual reason for visiting, and that, they really enjoyed having that possibility. And also in going to Agi, they would know that she had bought work. She only bought work that she believed, as David indicated, to be really good work. She had a particular interest in figurative work. She ran her own figurative art prize for a number of years, and she always considered everything, the colour, the composition. So when people bought from her, they were buying from someone who had considered very thoughtfully what she would put into almost her collection of what she offered then for people to purchase. So it wasn't just a commercial transaction for her. It was really a passion for the art and artists that she believed in. And David mentioned the relationship with Nora Mininski, and of course she also supported very much people like Joseph Herman, who she was very close to.
They were very good friends, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember her telling me a very touching story about him giving her a work once and saying it was from one refugee to another. And, that was really very much something that she, that was just at the back of her mind with her own personal experience, which you touched on in your introduction. And even before the Hungarian uprising, as a child, her family had to go into hiding in Romania under the Nazi era, and then went back to Budapest and then had to leave Budapest. So she really had this first-hand experience of these traumatic events. And so that gave her, I think, a particular connection with these artists who had often had similar traumas in their own lives.
Tough times, yeah.
Was it something in your experience of knowing Agi that she spoke about?
Yes, she would, but she wouldn't volunteer it.
Yes.
It wouldn't be her first topic of conversation. Hi, David, or hi, Sarah, or hi, anybody. Did you know? Yes. That wasn't Agi's style. Agi was not a a publicly effervescent character. Privately, of course, it's completely different. I mean, she had the most wonderful smile, the most engaging communication style. She was warm, tough, but you want people to be independently minded. But yes, if you caught her at a melancholy moment or an inquisitive moment, she would share with you like these experiences, but she would share them, I'm quite sure, very selectively. She never used it as any form of tool or vehicle of communication.
I think always the art came first, the art and the artist. And then, you know, I only heard that story from her many years after I'd known her. And it was in the context of, we were discussing work by Herman. We have a picture now called Refugees, excuse me, by Herman. So it was in that refugee context rather than something that she offered first about herself, excuse me.
It's not, you know, looking at the sale, for instance, it's not, there's, the imagery is, it's to do with life rather than, you know, she didn't collect works specifically about the refugee experience. They're much wider than that. I mean,
absolutely. I think, like you say with Herman, you know, you have a representation of the whole career, and obviously Herman's career divides into these different stages. Well, the very earliest stages, there's almost nothing because of his own traumatic journey from Warsaw to Brussels to Glasgow to London. But I think you have a couple of Glasgow period works, and then of course the significant period in Wales, and then from the long life continuing on afterwards. So yes, she was looking, I guess, to represent an artist's whole career and life. And, you know, with Herman, she had that great body of work to choose from.
The same.
Oh, sorry, David.
No, I was only going to amplify what Sarah was saying. It's very important to understand Agi's commitment was scholarly within the art context. She wasn't trying to represent through her choice of art any particular story. I've got no doubt she had a natural affinity to fellow refugees and fellow artists who had experienced tough times, but it was art first, the quality and the context of the art first.
Absolutely. And an artist like Joseph Herman, he was in when they met, he was in a quite a different stage of his career. It was almost, would you say the late stage of his career, or mature part of his career, I suppose?
I don't know the exact year that they met, but certainly it would have been their latter
Maybe the last
part.
quarter.
Yes.
The last quarter, I would have thought. Joseph Herman was also very selective, shall we say, as to who he would befriend and share experiences with. He was also not a man to wear his life experiences on his shirt, which of course has other connotations, as you can imagine. But I think that's also, if you like, as much a tribute to Agi as it is to Joseph, in terms of the fact that they both found a great mutual respect and a great deal of common ground, and ultimately a great deal of genuine affection, which made the choice of her works by Herman even more poignant and relevant.
And she also was great in sort of discovering and rediscovering a number of women artists, you know, at a time when they were still not receiving the recognition they deserved. That's something that's still really being addressed now. And of course, among those was Eva Frankfurter.
Yes.
And there was an interview done with Agi some years ago by, I think, Gerald Kaufman, in which she or he linked their experiences and talked about, you know, the kind of unforgettable experience she'd had in Hungary as the reason that she tended to gravitate towards artists who were also immigrants, and that Eva Frankfurter was a prime example of that. And Eva's someone who Agi and, Eva's sister, Beata Planskoy, had done an enormous amount of work on to, bring her to public attention. They did an important exhibition together, and we later then did exhibitions ourselves. And Eva's work is now included in the current show at the Barbican on post-war British art, where she is recognised for the really important contribution that she made. And the work you're showing now is one we're very fortunate to have in the collection, and which is in the exhibition. It's actually on the lift door, so it's a rather marvellous experience when you go in and the two waitresses part, as it were. And of course, what Eva Frankfurter was doing there was recording the new immigrant communities around her. So she came from an assimilated, educated family in Germany, came over as a child as a so-called Hitler émigré. And then the work she did afterwards, she recorded both the older Jewish community in the Jewish East End. They were then primarily leaving the East End, but she was able to record that, although it was not her direct experience, but she took herself to live there and to record all the different communities in the East End. And at the same time, while she was working at Lyons Corner House, she was depicting all the new migrant communities, particularly the West Indian community, as we just saw in the waitresses. And she made particular friends among that generation, but she also painted Pakistani immigrants, she painted Cypriot immigrants from the war. So it was she didn't consider to do it for that reason, but there was an important documentary aspect to the work that she did, which we can see retrospectively. She did it out of empathy for the subjects, and Agi, in being first in showing this work, with the help of Eva's sister Beata, was really able to start bringing it to public attention.
I think Monica Baum-Ditchen wrote the book, wrote the first catalogue.
The essay for that catalogue, which Agi put together with Beata, and Monica's essay was a very important part of that. So once again, she was commissioning important scholars to record these stories, to unfold narratives, and to really add to the knowledge on the artist and the subject.
Can I just add one other thing, William, about this? Because I think it's a really important reflection on Agi's career. She was an art dealer. Art dealers are there to buy paintings and sell them at a profit. Right? That's the equation of the profession. And if you don't sell them and you don't sell them at a profit, you stop being an art dealer. So it's very simple. But Agi, as we talked about earlier on, was prepared to dedicate her time to really, in charitable terms, not-for-profit activities, because the amount of work that she will have actually engaged with Beata to actually record and to understand this forgotten artist ever would have been significant, and it would not have been profitable. But without that amount of dedication and contribution to an artist that she believed in, and she saw the social relevance of an artist reflecting immigrant communities in the mid-1950s, which was not what the norm was. That was not the standard issue. I think is laudable, and I think it really bears great credit to her, because it not only for the artist, but it actually was pioneering in terms of recognition of A, immigrant communities being represented, and B, women artists being represented.
Absolutely.
And this is quite an interesting journey, looking at Frankfurter's career. I mean, I believe that she didn't exhibit work in her lifetime, or not, or very rare.
Exhibit, but she exhibited outside the mainstream. So she never worked with a dealer or anything like that. She took herself to live in the East End, and she took part in really community exhibitions there, which were open to all at Whitechapel. So that was both immigrants, it was both professional and non-professional artists. And Eva's work was regularly picked out by the press because obviously she stood out as a professional amid that crowd. Early on, when she was at art school, she did show in a small context. There was something called the Coffee House Gallery in Trafalgar Square, and her fellow exhibitors included Frank Auerbach and Joe Tilton, but that was very early on. So really, Eva Frankfurter sort of avoided all that mainstream galleries and gallerists and the West End and all that sort of thing. She took herself where she could paint, the people around her. That was really her prime motivation, was her empathy for people, which comes across very much in her work, and championing people on the margins of society.
But might I add, no doubt to the embarrassment of my colleague on my left, that there was a second woman who dedicated a great deal of her own time to the study and promotion of Eva's work, which is Sarah, who has worked with her Beata and worked tirelessly. And there's a website associated with Ben Uri called the Eva Frankfurter Collection.
It's just, you can just click through to, yes, it's just called Eva Frankfurter.
Eva Frankfurter
from our collection.
On the benuri.org, benuricollection.org website. And without Sarah's scholarship and research and effort and Ben Uri's support, I don't think necessarily that Eva Frankfurter would be a highlight in the Barbican exhibition and one of the poster images. So it takes individuals to dedicate a great deal of commitment to actually bring unrecognized artists into wide recognition. And Agi certainly was, and Sarah certainly is.
Well, turning back to Agi as the subject, that's certainly, great contribution that she was able to make. And some of the other women artists that she looked at were Geisha Koenig, who is...
We've sadly only got one drawing in the sale. She's a wonderful artist. But
yes, and, a really interesting figure. And Agi wrote very knowledgeably about her. And she also showed other women such as Greta Marx, who was an important Bauhaus ceramicist, and other German artists of that era, such as Pamina Liebert-Marenholz.
Yes.
So, she really was able to have this really good eye, which is essential for a gallerist, to spot these people and put their works together in a really comprehensive way. So the shows were both accessible and really attractive, obviously, to buyers, and helped the work to be spread really widely and enjoyed by a lot of people.
Yes, with a lot of the artists, there's quite a gap. I mean, someone like Gertler and Meninsky, their lives were quite, unfortunately cut short. Sarah, do you know when there'd been a Gertler exhibitions between his death and the 1980s when Agi put on a show? Was there quite a gap? Or
there was one. The thing with Gertler is there's really been a sort of exhibition roughly every 10 years since his death. But his reputation went up and down, and really after his death and then after the Second World War, there was a sort of brief remembering, but then the art world sort of moved on and changed for a while. And I would say sort of certainly by the 70s, when the first biography came out, his reputation was at quite a low ebb at that stage. And so Agi was still really picking up on that later in the 80s. And I think it was really clever that she decided to pick these two different periods of his work, very different periods, to show people, you know, the progression and change in the work. And I know she definitely included some works there which had not been shown before. So, you know, she was really sort of pioneering there. It's always interesting to see how artists fare in the years after their deaths. And, you know, often when they are picked up again, it is because somebody with a really good eye says, hang on, you know, there's good work out there and we should be looking at this person. And, you know, she was really able to do that.
Yes, I mean, Frankfurt is the perfect embodiment of that in some ways now, how the issue, I mean, how different issues come to the fore in different eras. I mean, the art that we see in museums relates to how people are thinking at the times. I mean, her work is to do with a very particular type of person and a very particular narrative. And I suppose Agi was always something that Agi had is it right to say, a very steady aesthetic? There was always a common thread.
I would say so. I think she, you know, she spoke about how the work she championed was always figurative. So, you know, that was a key interest for her. And we've talked about the backgrounds of the artists, but I mean, within that, of course, each artist had a great range of periods, styles, phases, use of different media. You know, the work you're showing now is from a particular period of Gertler's life when he concentrated on sporting figures, dancing figures, acrobats. He'd just done, prior to this, his only sculpture, which is now in Tate. And there was a particular focus for a short time around dance, theatrical experiences, circuses, and so on. And that was shared by a wider group of artists at the time as well, people like Duncan Grant and so forth. So, you know, she was able to, she had knowledge of these different periods and was able to sort of spot where a work fitted into an artist's whole story and career. And, you know, that's a very fine drawing on the screen.
I thought that's a lovely photo there. I thought we could just discuss Lillian Bomberg a little. I thought that.
Yes, Lillian was really key figure who really was responsible, wasn't she, David, for you know, yes, she really was the keeper of the flame, and she worked tirelessly to promote David Bomberg's reputation, you know, at the expense of doing her own work. She only did her own work really much later, having dedicated so much of her time to bringing his reputation to the fore. But her own work obviously shows his influence, but also that she was really part of this particular era. They went to the same places, obviously, together. He also did studies of Rouen Cathedral and so forth. And it's really fantastic to see them both doing subjects like that, doing Spain. And, you know, Lillian also worked after Agi with Richard Cork, obviously, to produce the great biography. So she was a key figure in her own right, and then had this important relationship with Agi.
I mean, she would have, I mean, first of all, you have to understand that Bomberg and Ben-Uri go back all the way, historic relationship. So Ben-Uri would not be new to her. And the relationship with Lillian started at Ben-Uri because Lillian was determined to find the best vehicles to actually rehabilitate Bomberg's reputation, which he enjoyed right at the beginning of his career and in various midpoints, but generally speaking was ultimately neglected by collectors and dealers and museums alike. So, and Lillian, as Sarah has described, was a powerhouse. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. She believed in Bomberg's work, and was one of the few examples where actually somebody can almost single-handedly, but build a network of scholars and dealers and museums, and knit them together to create this resurgence of interest. And I'm not suggesting for a second that Agi and Ben-Uri, without Agi and Ben-Uri's influence and contribution, that wouldn't have happened. But it certainly would have been a gap, and she was very well aware of that, and then continued that relationship after she left Ben-Uri and opened the Boundary Gallery. She loved Bomberg's work. I mean, no question.
Yes, so I thought almost to sort of close up, I might ask you, how do you think, the Boundary Gallery is now quite an important provenance, particularly for these type of artists. It will always have a particular meaning, and it will almost stand for, I suppose, if not a style, then a type of artwork. How do you think the gallery in Agi will be remembered?
Well, I think she will be remembered as a sort of wise, generous collector as well as gallerist, with a deep love of her subject and appreciation for art, as someone who was not only knowledgeable but keen to sort of share that knowledge. And also with the establishment of the Boundary Gallery, I think she's really taken her place as one of the many important émigré gallerists, particularly female gallerists like Annalie Juda. So, there are a number of galleries, important galleries, which were set up by émigrés, and I think, she's really earned her place as one of those.
I'm not sure I can add anything more to that, except just perhaps one observation, as from my collector's hat on, that when you actually, if you see the Provenance Boundary Gallery, you know that the picture has been chosen on its merits, not because it's art of the artist's name or because of the image or anything else. It's a much deeper appreciation of the contextual elements of that particular artwork. And that's as rare today as it was yesterday.
I mean, I agree, as with my auctioneer hat on, putting together the sale, when you see it running over the pages on our, on our website and hanging on the walls, it all has there's a total narrative. Even some of the works which have no name with them, we don't know who they were by, or they're by very, very minor artists. It still makes total sense to each one. It may not be the most popular work by that artist, but it makes sense within Agi's vision and what it means. So I completely understand what you're saying.
Absolutely. Okay.
Well, thank you both, and thank you to our audience for listening. And I hope you can all come and see the sale when it's on display this week, and look out for the sale on Thursday.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.